I wonder how concerned you are potentially about the Supreme Court watering down the case against these January 6th offenders.
My hope is that they don't, because it's not just about the January 6th offenders. It's about the rule of law and the ability for Congress to subpoena and secure information and be able to enforce, and also for the judicial system to be able to call witnesses and things like that. You want to do it for the system, not necessarily for this particular case, because the shoe may be on the foot in the future, and a different party may be the one that's in the wrong. So my hope is that they look at it for in a holistic way.
Well, and thinking about all of the ways in which this ruling ultimately could translate, it potentially impacts the case brought against former President Trump here in Washington, which related to the events in and around January 6th of 2021. This could potentially remove some of the charges against him. That is, of course, if the court doesn't rule him immune from prosecution entirely in that case. We're awaiting both of these decisions on the eve of a presidential debate in which Donald Trump is participating. Is there any way in your mind, Congresswoman, to separate the court from politics right now, or is this all inherently political?
My hope is that the court can be apolitical. I mean, the American people are desperate for some institution that isn't just completely eaten up by partisanship. And so it's really important that they do look at this without a partisan lens, and my hope is that they'll do that. But I think when you're talking about the debate, I don't think the American people are going to be listening in the debate for what is said about January 6th. They're listening for what is going to be said about the economy and the future of this country, and who's going to lay out a plan to make lives better here in America.
This, of course, will come down to an interpretation of obstructing an official proceeding, which is a law that was written up about Enron in 2002. So this could come down to a technicality. And I don't want to talk to you the whole time that you're here about January 6th. But in a couple of weeks, once we get through this debate tomorrow, we're going to be at a convention in Milwaukee. I think you're going to be there.
I will be.
There's talk about Donald Trump bringing members of the so-called January 6th choir up on stage, that some of these very people we're talking about will be featured at the convention. What should we make of this?
I think that's part of his shtick, right? This is a part of what
he's promised to pardon them.
Yeah, he's promised to pardon them. He's promised to try to indict January 6th select members. But at the end of the day, our judicial system is built in part upon fellow Americans, people who get called to sit on grand juries and be a part of the judicial system. The folks who got convicted for their role in January 6th were convicted by a jury of their peers. And I know that there's a lot of talk in the Republican Party and to try to kind of confuse things and muddy the waters on that. But they got fair trials in front of their peers.
Of course, we are likely to see at least some of this coming up in the debate, even if, as you were arguing, this isn't necessarily what the American people most want to hear from either of these candidates. But on the subject of the debate, we spoke earlier today with Cliff Young, or at least Joe did, the president of U.S. Public Affairs at Ipsos, about expectations for each candidate tomorrow night.
Biden has to go in and show that he's competent, that he's presidential, that he doesn't have a cognitive agility problem. And ultimately, as I was saying, he has to show more. He has, in some ways, more to lose, more downside than Trump. The American populace expects Trump to be irreverent, to be kind of all over the place. That is his style.
Can policy even really break through in a debate that appears to be at least so much about expectations of pure performance of these older candidates?
You know, I think what will happen is that there aren't going to be wide swaths of Americans watching all 90 minutes of the debate. What will likely happen is there will be clips that come out, moments that come out of the debate that will be seen most likely on social media platforms. And people are in their own ideological cul-de-sacs on these social media platforms. So they're likely to see clips of things that reinforce what they already believe about the candidates. I'm not sure that this is anything that's going to swing those undecided voters who, quite frankly, haven't really picked their heads up to pay much attention to the election. They tend to be a little later in the cycle before they really engage.
Well, it's an awfully good point. People are celebrating the rules here. I know the mics are going to be cut off. But what we've done is create an environment, as you described, that encourages the viral moment that encourages both of these men to show up with zingers and one-liners, which kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? Why even have a debate if we're at this point?
Well, they have to debate, but debates used to mean something when they were introducing candidates to the American people. There's nobody in America who doesn't know who Donald Trump and Joe Biden are, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, this debate may not have the same impact that previous debates have had when it's new candidates.
Okay, so if potentially you're not going to be telling them anything new about yourself, you try maybe to just make your policy stances more well-known or at least more well-defined. How much of the debate tomorrow night do you think will actually be these candidates forced to cite specific policy ideas versus kind of things that Donald Trump has been floating, say, in regard to the tax code and tariffs? And will there be any consequence if they don't do that, if they still are talking in kind of grand ideas?
I think it's important. It's an opportunity for Biden to exceed expectations about his performance, kind of the way he did at the State of the Union. And then the other thing is to really pin Trump down on some of these tax plans that he has that really are meant to benefit the wealthy and not really do much for average Americans. Pin him down on, what he plans on doing to actually lower costs for the American people. The hope is that they both put out a vision for what America looks like so the American people have a choice.
What's more important for the outcome of this cycle? I think I know your answer. Will it be the debate tomorrow night or Donald Trump's sentencing on the 11th of July?
I believe that Donald Trump's sentencing is sort of baked into what people believe about him. His base doesn't seem to mind. I think there's shirts that say, "I'm with the felon," so they're almost celebrating it. So his base isn't going to leave him given the outcome of the sentencing. For independent voter, and the Democrats know that this is part of what they don't like about Trump is his willingness to be above the law. And for independent voters, they're mostly focused on the economy.